Greetings, dear friends, and welcome. We're so delighted you could join us once again for Bedtime Biographies, where together we unwind and drift peacefully away to the soothing accounts of truly remarkable lives. Our journey this evening takes us to the turn of the 20th century, to an era when electricity was still mysterious magic, when the future seemed to crackle with endless possibility. Picture, if you will, a tall, impossibly thin man pacing alone in his Manhattan laboratory late into the night. Lightning arcs between copper coils taller than a person. The air smells of ozone and ambition. His dark eyes burn with visions of a world transformed. Cities lit without wires. Messages sent through the very air itself. Energy drawn from the invisible forces that surround us. His name, Nikola Tesla. His mission, nothing less than to gift humanity a future of abundance, of wireless wonder, of power flowing freely to all who needed it. Before we properly begin our exploration of Tesla's extraordinary story, just a brief, gentle thought. If these calm explorations of significant lives help you unwind at the end of your day, please consider taking a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It genuinely helps other curious, thoughtful minds discover these stories. And we're always deeply curious about your reflections and thoughts. Please let us know in the comments below what you think of Tesla's life and ideas, and which historical figure you'd like us to explore in our next bedtime biography. Now, the name Tesla appears everywhere these days. On electric cars, on technology company logos, in science fiction and popular culture. But strip away all the mythologizing, all the legends that have accumulated over more than a century. And at its heart, Tesla's story is really just a question. A profoundly human question. What if genius isn't enough? What if seeing the future clearly, decades before anyone else, doesn't guarantee success? What if the visionary dies poor, while lesser minds profit from his dreams? Tesla spent his entire adult life chasing visions that appeared to him fully formed, complete in every detail. He saw alternating current power systems, while others were still wedded to direct current. He imagined wireless communication before radio existed. He dreamed of renewable energy and global connectivity in an age of coal and isolation. Of course, history took some of his inventions and ran absolutely wild with them, while others languished unbuilt for decades. Patents were fought over, credit was stolen, promises were broken. But tonight, we are not here for the fireworks of invention or the grand sweep of technological progress. We're just here to meet the man behind the myth. A brilliant, eccentric, deeply troubled, and profoundly visionary thinker who desperately wanted to give humanity a better world and devoted every waking hour to manifesting the impossible. And now, as the day winds down and the evening settles, around us like a comfortable blanket, let's begin to trace the life and times of this deeply influential inventor. This is the bedtime biography of Nikola Tesla, the child who saw lightning. Our story begins on a summer night in 1856, during a fierce electrical storm in the remote village of Smiljan, nestled in the mountainous borderlands between the Austrian Empire and the Ottoman territories. The exact timing of his birth would become part of the Tesla mythology. He entered the world precisely at midnight between July the 9th and July the 10th, as lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the small wooden house where his mother laboured. The midwife, witnessing the intensity of the storm, supposedly declared the infant a child of the storm, or perhaps a child of darkness. His mother, Duca Tesla, exhausted but defiant, corrected her. No, of light. whether this exchange actually occurred or was invented later to fit the narrative of Tesla's life, it captured something essential about the man he would become, forever associated with electricity, forever transforming darkness into illumination. His father, Milutin Tesla, was an Orthodox priest and writer, a man of words and faith who expected his brilliant son to follow him into the priesthood. Milutin possessed a prodigious memory and considerable eloquence, gifts he passed to his son, along with a certain impractical idealism. He filled their home with books, theological works certainly, but also poetry, philosophy, and whatever scientific texts made their way to this remote corner of the empire. But it was his mother who truly shaped Tesla's genius. Juka Mandic. Tesla was illiterate by the standards of formal education. She never learned to read, but possessed an inventive mind that never rested. In the evenings, after completing her household duties, she would sit by lamplight, creating intricate tools and mechanical devices to ease the burden of rural life. She invented a mechanical egg beater, improved looms for weaving, created ingenious solutions to everyday problems with whatever materials were at hand. Young Nikola would watch, transfixed, as his mother's clever fingers transformed wood, metal, and fabric into functional machines. She could see in 3 dimensions, could visualize how mechanisms would work before building them, could hold entire designs in her memory without drawings or plans. These were gifts she passed to her son in full measure, along with her fierce independence and her impatience with limitations. The Tesla household hummed with contradictions. Faith and invention, tradition and innovation, the spiritual and the mechanical existing side by side. Milutin wanted his children to contemplate eternal truths and salvation. Juka wanted to build better mousetraps and more efficient spinning wheels. Young Nikola absorbed it all, developing both his father's ability to work with abstract concepts and his mother's practical inventiveness. He was the 4th of 5 children, born after his older brother Dane, who was killed in a horse-riding accident when Nikola was just 5 years old. This tragedy would haunt Tesla for the rest of his life. Dane had been the golden child, the favoured son, brilliant and charming. After his death, young Nikola lived in his brother's shadow, simultaneously trying to live up to Dane's memory and crushed by the weight of his parents' transferred expectations. Tesla later described experiencing strange visions, even as a small child, blinding flashes of light that would appear before his eyes, accompanied by images so vivid he couldn't distinguish them from reality. Sometimes these visions were triggered by specific words or ideas. The word pearl might conjure such a realistic image of a pearl that he could not tell whether the object was real or imaginary. These weren't hallucinations in the pathological sense, but rather an unusually vivid visual imagination that he would later harness for his inventive process. The village of Smiljan itself was a place of stark beauty and isolation. Mountains rose dramatically from valleys where shepherds tended their flocks. Winters were harsh, summers brief and intense. The nearest city, Gospic, where the family would later move, was barely more than a large town. This was a world still deeply traditional, where Orthodox Christianity shaped daily life, where modernity had barely penetrated. Yet even in this remote place, young Nikola displayed the obsessive curiosity that would define his life. He dismantled clocks to understand their workings, much to his parents' dismay when he couldn't quite get them back together. He caught frogs and beetles, studying their movements with scientific intensity. He built water wheels in streams, watching for hours as the water turned his crude constructions. One of his earliest inventions, if it could be called that, was a device to harness the power of June bugs. He collected the insects, glued them to a miniature windmill, and watched in fascination as their frantic buzzing made the vanes turn. It was a glimpse of the obsession that would drive him for life, capturing and directing natural forces, bending the energies of the universe to human purposes. The experiment ended abruptly when a neighbourhood boy, visiting the workshop, began eating the June bugs raw, revolting Tesla so thoroughly he abandoned the project immediately. By the time he was 8 years old, attending the local school in Gospich, his teachers already recognised something unusual in the intense, thin boy who sat in the back row, often seeming to stare into space while simultaneously absorbing every word of the lesson. He could perform complex calculations in his head with startling speed. He spoke several languages: Serbian, German, Italian, French, picking them up with an ease that suggested something beyond normal learning. But he was also becoming aware of his differences, his oddness. The vivid visions that helped him visualize. Mechanical problems also made social interaction difficult. He was developing peculiar aversions to pearls and pearl earrings, which made him physically ill if a woman wearing them came near, to round objects, to the feel of certain fabrics. These weren't mere preferences, but visceral reactions he couldn't control or explain. At night, lying in his small bed in the family's house, young Nikola would close his eyes and see entire machines operating before him. He could rotate them in his mind, examine them from every angle, test their operation without ever touching wood or metal. This ability, to build and test inventions entirely in the theatre of his mind, would become his greatest gift, and perhaps one of his greatest curses. The lightning that had greeted his birth seemed to have imprinted itself on his consciousness. He was fascinated by electricity in an era when its nature remained mysterious and controversial. Was it a fluid? A force? How did it relate to magnetism? Why did it arc and spark? These questions consumed him even before he had the mathematical or physical knowledge to properly approach them. When he was 9, he read about Niagara Falls in a book and immediately saw in his mind's eye a great water wheel harnessing that tremendous force. He drew it compulsively in his school notebooks, earning reprimands from teachers who wanted him to focus on his grammar exercises. But the vision had taken hold, the image of nature's power being tamed, of energy flowing in service of humanity. His father, watching his son's growing obsession with machines and natural forces, felt both pride and alarm. This was not the mind of a future priest. This was the mind of an engineer, an inventor, possibly even, God forbid, a heretic who might question theological certainties. The tension between Milutin's expectations and Nikola's inclinations would shape the young man's adolescence, creating an internal conflict between duty and destiny. As Tesla approached his teenage years, the remote village that had nurtured his early curiosity began to feel like a cage. Beyond those mountains lay a world of universities and laboratories, of electrical experiments and mechanical wonders. Beyond those mountains lay the future that appeared so vividly in his mind's eye, complete and waiting to be built. The child who had been born in lightning was beginning to understand that his destiny lay not in the priesthood or in his father's books, but in harnessing the very forces that had announced his arrival. The storms that swept through the mountains of his childhood were calling him towards storms of a different kind, the creative tempests that would eventually reshape the modern world. But first, he would have to survive several near-death experiences, defy his father's expectations, and somehow make his way from this isolated corner of Europe to the great laboratories and workshops where the future was being invented. The journey would be long, strange, and, marked by the kind of obsessive determination that can look like madness from the outside, but feels, to the person experiencing it, like the only possible path. The education of a visionary. The teenage years arrived with all their characteristic intensity, but for Tesla, they brought something darker than normal adolescent tumult. At 14, while still studying at the gymnasium in Gospic, he was struck by his first serious illness, likely cholera, though the diagnosis was uncertain in that era of limited medical knowledge. For 9 months he lay in bed, hovering between life and death, so weakened that he could barely lift his head from the pillow. His father, desperate and watching his son fade, made a promise that would change everything. Sitting by Nikola's bedside in the dim lamplight, Milutin finally spoke the words the boy had longed to hear. "You will get better, and I will let you study engineering." The desire to pursue engineering rather than the priesthood had been the great unspoken tension in their household. Now, with death seemingly imminent, his father's resistance crumbled. The effect was immediate and almost miraculous. Years later, Tesla would describe how his father's promise seemed to restore his will to live. Whether this was psychological suggestion or coincidence, the young man began a slow recovery, emerging from his sickbed, rail-thin but alive, finally freed to pursue the education his visions demanded. But there would be one more obstacle before university: to avoid conscription into the Austro-Hungarian army, a fate that seemed like a death sentence for someone of his delicate health and temperament. Tesla fled to the mountains, spending a year hiding in the remote wilderness. This period of isolation, living rough in the forests and hills, sleeping under stars, was transformative in unexpected ways. Away from books and formal studies, surrounded only by nature, Tesla found his mind operating with unusual clarity. The visions that had always accompanied him became more vivid, more detailed. He could close his eyes and see entire systems of machinery operating, could mentally construct and test devices with no physical materials whatsoever. The mountains became his laboratory, imagination his only tool. He read voraciously during this period, whatever books he could obtain from sympathetic relatives who brought supplies to his hiding places. He particularly devoured works on electricity and magnetism, including descriptions of recent experiments with electromagnetic induction. The seeds of his future innovations were being planted in the fertile soil of forced isolation and intensive study. When he finally emerged from hiding in 1875, gaunt and hardened by his year of self-imposed exile, Tesla enrolled at the Austrian Polytechnic School in Graz. The institution was no MIT or Oxford. It was a solid technical school in a provincial city. But it offered something Tesla needed desperately: access to laboratories, equipment, and most importantly, demonstration models of the latest electrical devices. It was in Graz that Tesla encountered the machine that would haunt him for years and ultimately lead to his greatest breakthrough. Professor Jacob Purcell demonstrated a Gram dynamo, one of the early generators that could produce direct current electricity. But the device sparked and stuttered as it operated. The commutator, the switching mechanism that kept the current flowing in one direction, creating a cascade of sparks that seemed wasteful and inelegant. Tesla, with his characteristic intensity and lack of social grace, stood up in the middle of the demonstration and announced that the commutator was unnecessary, that there must be a better way to generate electrical currents. Professor Purcell, a practical engineer with little patience for theoretical speculation, publicly humiliated the presumptuous student. "Mr. Tesla may accomplish great things," he declared with dripping sarcasm, "but he certainly will never do this. It would be equivalent to converting a steadily pulling force, like gravity, into rotary effort. It is a perpetual motion scheme, an impossible idea. For most students, such a public rebuke from a respected professor would have ended the matter. But Tesla's mind didn't work like most minds. The problem lodged in his consciousness like a splinter. Uncomfortable, irritating, impossible to ignore. For the next 6 years, the question of how to eliminate the commutator and create a more elegant system of electrical generation consumed him. His first year at Graz was marked by manic intensity. He worked from 3 in the morning until 11 at night, sleeping only a few hours. He studied not just electrical engineering, but physics, mechanics, and mathematics with an almost pathological dedication. His professors noted his brilliance, but worried about his health and his inability to moderate his efforts. Then, in his second year, something shifted dramatically. The obsessive student who had worked himself nearly to exhaustion suddenly began frequenting billiard halls and card rooms. Money that should have gone toward tuition disappeared into gambling. Letters home became evasive and irregular. By his third year, Tesla had stopped attending classes entirely, vanishing into Graz's seedier establishments, playing cards and billiards with an intensity he'd formerly reserved for his studies. His family, receiving no news and fearing the worst, assumed he'd died. His father travelled to Graz searching for him, only to discover that his brilliant son had become a professional gambler, haunting the gaming halls of a provincial Austrian city. The confrontation was apparently devastating, though Tesla rarely spoke of it in later years. What drove this brilliant mind to apparent self-destruction? Depression? Exhaustion? The crushing weight of his own visions and his inability yet to manifest them? Whatever the cause, Tesla eventually pulled himself back from the brink. In 1879, he returned to academic life, enrolling at Charles Ferdinand University in Prague. But his father died suddenly that same year, and without Milutin's financial support, Tesla couldn't continue his studies. His university education, marked by both brilliance and breakdown, ended without a degree. What followed was a period of rootless wandering that would have broken a less determined person. Tesla worked as a draftsman in Maribor, Slovenia, earning barely enough to survive. He was found one day by his uncle, passed out in the street, having collapsed from exhaustion and malnutrition. He took a teaching position at his old school in Gospic, but the work was suffocating for someone whose mind operated at such extraordinary levels. Then came Budapest in 1881, where Tesla secured a position at the Budapest Telephone Exchange. The job was mundane, helping to build telephone infrastructure, but it gave him access to electrical equipment and, more importantly, time to think. He was now in his mid-20s, brilliant but unknown, without formal credentials, working a job below his abilities, still haunted by the question Professor Purcell had dismissed, how to build a better generator. The breakthrough came during a walk through a city park at sunset in February 1882. Tesla was reciting passages from Goethe's Faust to a friend. He had a prodigious memory and could recite entire books, when suddenly he stopped mid-sentence. In his mind's eye, complete and perfect in every detail, the solution appeared. Not as a vague idea, but as a fully operational machine. He saw a rotating magnetic field, alternating currents flowing through coils arranged in specific patterns, their phases offset precisely, creating a magnetic field that rotated in space. And in that rotating field, a rotor would spin without any physical connection, without any commutator or switching mechanism. It was elegant, efficient, beautiful in its simplicity. It was impossible and perfect and utterly revolutionary. Tesla grabbed a stick and began drawing frantically in the dirt of the park path, sketching out the design that had appeared to him. "See my motor here," he told his bewildered companion, pointing at crude diagrams scratched into the earth. "Watch me reverse it." He erased parts and redrew them, demonstrating how the direction could be reversed simply by switching the phase connections. For most inventors, this would have been the beginning of years of trial and error, of building prototypes and testing configurations. But Tesla's mind worked differently. He had already built and tested the motor in his imagination. He had run it at different speeds, examined it from every angle, identified potential problems and solved them, all in the theatre of his mind. The physical construction would be merely a formality, a translation of a mental reality into physical form. But translating visions into reality requires resources, materials, workshops, and most of all, money, none of which Tesla possessed. The brilliant insight that would eventually power the modern world remained, for now, locked in the mind of a penniless telephone company employee walking through a Budapest park at sunset. What Tesla didn't know, couldn't know, was that his vision had arrived at precisely the right moment. Across Europe and America, the war of the currents was beginning to heat up. Direct current, championed by Thomas Edison and his growing empire of electrical companies, was spreading through cities but faced severe limitations. Alternating current, still crude and dangerous, was beginning to show promise. And somewhere in America, a young Serbian inventor's rotating magnetic field was about to become the weapon that would decide the war. But first, Tesla needed to get to America. And more importantly, he needed to meet the Wizard of Menlo Park himself, Thomas Edison, the most famous inventor in the world, the man who would become his employer, his rival, and ultimately his enemy. The American arrival. The SS Oregon departed from Le Havre in the spring of 1884, carrying steerage passengers, cargo, and one tall, gaunt Serbian engineer with exactly 4 cents in his pocket, a sheaf of mathematical calculations, and a letter of introduction. Nikola Tesla, now 28 years old, was making the voyage to America with almost nothing. His luggage had been stolen at the dock, along with most of his money, but he carried something more valuable than possessions, a complete vision of how to electrify the world. The letter, written by his former employer Charles Batchelor, was addressed to Thomas Edison and contained one of history's great introductions. "I know 2 great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." Whether Batchelor actually wrote these exact words is debated, but the sentiment captured the reality. Tesla was bringing to Edison's door a genius that might rival his own. New York City in 1884 greeted Tesla like a punch to the face, loud, dirty, chaotic, vibrant, and alive with possibility. Edison's Pearl Street station had been operating for just 2 years, providing direct current electricity to a small section of lower Manhattan. Gas lamps still lit most streets. Horses still outnumbered automobiles, which didn't yet exist. But electricity, mysterious, powerful, modern, was beginning its conquest of American cities. Tesla made his way to Edison's laboratory at 65 Fifth Avenue, his rumpled clothes still smelling of the sea, and presented his letter. Edison, already famous as the Wizard of Menlo Park, studied the gaunt foreigner with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Tesla spoke passable English, but with a thick accent. He was obviously brilliant, but just as obviously impractical, theoretical, more scientist than businessman. Edison hired him almost immediately. His laboratory needed talented electrical engineers, and Tesla's credentials, work with Continental, Edison in Paris, recommendations from trusted colleagues, were solid, But the two men were fundamentally incompatible in almost every way that mattered. Edison was the quintessential American inventor, practical, empirical, willing to try 10,000 experiments to find what worked. He believed in hard work and trial and error more than elegant theory. Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, he famously declared. He worked his employees brutally hard, slept little, and expected loyalty in exchange for the privilege of working in his laboratory. Tesla, by contrast, worked entirely in his mind first. He could visualize machines completely, test them mentally, identify and solve problems before ever touching physical materials. He rarely kept notes because he kept everything in his prodigious memory. He was fastidious about his appearance even when poor, changed his clothes frequently, and found Edison's work till you drop ethos barbaric. Their fundamental disagreement centered on the nature of electrical current itself. Edison's empire was built on direct current, electricity flowing steadily in one direction, like water through a pipe. DC worked fine for lighting buildings, but it had severe limitations. It couldn't be transmitted more than a mile or so without significant losses. This meant you needed a power station every mile, which was expensive and inefficient. Tesla had brought with him plans for alternating current systems. Current that reversed direction many times per second, that could be easily transformed to high voltages for transmission, and then stepped back down for use, that could be sent hundreds of miles efficiently. He tried to explain this to Edison, tried to show him the rotating magnetic field motor that needed no commutator, that was more efficient and reliable than anything Edison had built. Edison, according to Tesla's later recollections, dismissed the ideas with barely concealed contempt. "Spare me that nonsense," he allegedly said. "It's dangerous. We have no use for it in America." Whether this dismissal was quite so dramatic is unclear. Both men's later accounts of their relationship were coloured by years of rivalry. But Edison certainly showed no interest in pursuing alternating current, which threatened the DC infrastructure his companies had invested millions in building. The turning point came over money, as it so often does. Tesla claimed that Edison offered him $50,000, an enormous sum in 1884, if he could improve the efficiency of Edison's DC generators and motors. Tesla threw himself into the work with characteristic intensity, redesigning 24 types of machines, creating new regulator designs, making Edison's systems significantly more efficient and profitable. When the work was complete and Tesla asked for the promised payment, Edison, according to Tesla's version, laughed it off as a joke. "Tesla, you don't understand our American humour," he allegedly said, though he did offer a raise from $18 to $28 a week. Whether this happened exactly as Tesla described is uncertain. Edison's defenders claim the $50,000 figure is implausibly large, and that Tesla may have misunderstood a comment or promise. But what's certain is that Tesla felt profoundly betrayed, felt that his work had been undervalued, that promises had been broken. In the spring of 1885, after less than a year with Edison, Tesla resigned. The next year and a half were among the worst of Tesla's life. He tried to start his own electric lighting company with some investors he'd met. They were interested in his arc lighting patents, an improved system for streetlights, but showed no interest in his alternating current motors or his larger vision. Once they had his lighting patents, the investors squeezed Tesla out of his own company, leaving him with nothing. Suddenly, the genius who had redesigned Edison's systems, who carried in his mind the future of electrical power, was digging ditches for the New York City street repair system. It was physically brutal work, far removed from the laboratories and drawing boards where his talents belonged. He earned $2 per day, barely enough to afford a room in a boarding house. At night, exhausted from physical labour, he would lie awake thinking about the rotating magnetic field motor, about alternating current systems, about all the inventions locked in his mind with no way to manifest them. The foreman of his ditch-digging crew, learning that the tall Serbian labourer had training in electrical engineering, mentioned his situation to some potential investors. Through this unlikely connection, a sympathetic foreman, Tesla met Alfred S. Brown, a superintendent at Western Union Telegraph Company, and Charles F. Peck, a lawyer. Unlike his previous investors, these men were willing to listen to Tesla's larger vision. In April 1887, Tesla established his own laboratory at 89 Liberty Street in Manhattan. Finally, at age 31, he had a space to build the machines that had existed only in his mind. The first order of business was proving his alternating current motor worked. Within months, he had constructed working prototypes of his polyphase induction motor, the device that had come to him fully formed during that sunset walk in Budapest 5 years earlier. The motor was elegant in its simplicity. No commutator to spark and wear out. No brushes to replace. Just electromagnets arranged in a specific pattern, fed with alternating currents offset in phase, creating a rotating magnetic field that pulled a rotor along with it. It could be scaled to any size, from tiny motors to enormous industrial machines. It was efficient, reliable, and absolutely revolutionary. Tesla filed for patents on his motor and related alternating current systems in October 1887. The patents, granted in May 1888, were works of art in themselves. Clear, comprehensive, covering not just one motor design but an entire integrated system of generation, transmission, and motor operation. These weren't narrow patents describing a specific widget, but broad intellectual property covering fundamental principles. With working motors and solid patents, Tesla began demonstrating his inventions to anyone who would watch. The American Institute of Electrical Engineers invited him to present a paper in May 1888. His lecture, A New System of Alternate Current Motors and Transformers, should have been a dry technical presentation. Instead, it was a revelation. Tesla didn't just describe his motors, he brought them, set them running, showed how elegantly they operated. He demonstrated motors with 2 phases, 3 phases, 4 phases. He showed how they could start under full load, how their speed remained nearly constant regardless of mechanical resistance, how they required virtually no maintenance. Engineers in the audience recognized immediately that they were watching the future of electrical power. One person in particular took notice, George Westinghouse, the brilliant engineer and industrialist who had already made his fortune from railway air brakes. Westinghouse had been investing in alternating current power systems, seeing, like Tesla, that DC's limitations would eventually doom Edison's approach. But Westinghouse's AC systems were crude, using arc lights and lacking good motors. What Tesla had invented was precisely what Westinghouse needed: efficient, reliable AC motors that would make alternating current useful for industrial power, not just lighting. In July 1888, Westinghouse travelled to Tesla's laboratory and made an offer that would change everything. For Tesla's patents and consulting services, Westinghouse offered $60,000 cash, $150 in Westinghouse stock, and $2.50 in royalties for every horsepower of electricity generated by Tesla's motor. If Tesla's system became the standard, as both men expected, the royalty agreement alone would make Tesla one of the wealthiest men in America. The Serbian immigrant who'd been digging ditches 2 years earlier suddenly found himself at the centre of what would become known as the War of the Currents, the brutal industrial and public relations battle between Edison's direct current and the Westinghouse-Tesla alternating current. The stakes were enormous. Whichever system won would power the electrification of the entire world. Edison, seeing his DC empire threatened, would stop at nothing to prove that alternating current was dangerous, impractical, and deadly. Tesla, allied with Westinghouse, would have to prove that his elegant mathematical vision could actually light up the world. The war was about to begin, and it would be fought not just in laboratories and patent courts, but in newspapers, public demonstrations, and ultimately in electric chairs. The genius with 4 cents in his pocket had found his platform. Now he needed to win a war. The War of Currents. The battle for the future of electricity began, as so many wars do, with propaganda. Edison, facing the existential threat that Tesla's alternating current posed to his DC empire, launched what can only be described as a fear campaign. If reason and engineering efficiency wouldn't preserve his monopoly, perhaps terror would. Edison began publicly referring to alternating current as the executioner's current. He hired Harold P. Brown, an electrical engineer, to conduct public demonstrations of AC's supposed dangers. In gruesome exhibitions, Brown would use alternating current to electrocute dogs, cats, horses, and even, in one notorious event, an elephant named Topsy. The message was clear. Alternating current was deadly, dangerous, not suitable for American homes. The campaign reached its darkest point when Edison and Brown successfully lobbied New York State to adopt alternating current for its new electric chair, reasoning that the public would associate AC with death and execution. In 1890, William Kemmler became the first person executed by electrocution, killed by a Westinghouse AC generator in a botched procedure so horrific that witnesses vomited, and one reporter fainted. Edison's spokespeople began using the term Westinghoused to describe electrocution deaths, trying to create linguistic association between Tesla's patron and gruesome mortality. It was perhaps the first truly modern disinformation campaign, using media manipulation and public spectacle to influence technological adoption. Tesla, watching this campaign from his laboratory, responded with the most powerful weapon available to an engineer: demonstration of superior technology. In 1891, he gave a lecture at Columbia University that became legendary in electrical engineering circles. He lit wireless lamps, literally holding glowing tubes with no wires connecting them, by passing high-frequency alternating current through his own body. The audience gasped as Tesla stood calmly on a platform, high-frequency current surging through him, creating a corona of sparks around his body while he held phosphorescent tubes that glowed brightly in his hands. He explained, with theatrical flair, that the frequency mattered more than the voltage, that high-frequency AC, which he was demonstrating, could be relatively safe despite enormous voltages, while lower frequency AC or DC could be lethal at much lower voltages. It was showmanship, certainly, but it was showmanship in service of scientific truth. Tesla understood something Edison's crude demonstrations missed. The human body's response to electricity depends on frequency, not just voltage and current. High-frequency currents tend to travel along the skin rather than through vital organs, making them dramatically safer than the demonstrations of lethality Edison was showcasing. But the real battlefield of the War of Currents would be the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition. celebrating the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas. The fair organisers wanted the entire fairgrounds illuminated by electricity, creating a white city that would showcase the modern age. The contract to provide this power would demonstrate more powerfully than any technical argument which system was superior. General Electric, Edison's company, which had absorbed his various enterprises, bid $1.72 million to light the fair with DC power. Westinghouse, advised by Tesla, bid just $399,000 to do it with AC. The difference was stark. AC's ability to be transformed to high voltages for efficient transmission meant it required less copper wiring, fewer power stations, lower overall costs. Westinghouse won the contract, and suddenly the task was to make good on the bid. Tesla worked frantically to design the systems needed to power the massive fairgrounds. The exposition would use 12 huge generators producing two-phase alternating current, distributed through the grounds to power over 100,000 incandescent lamps, the largest electrical installation ever attempted. On May 1st, 1893, President Grover Cleveland pressed a button, and the White City blazed into illumination. 27 million visitors over 6 months would see the future of electricity literally glowing before them. The fair featured Tesla's Polyfols motor running demonstrations, wireless lighting displays, and massive electrical installations, all powered by alternating current, all working flawlessly. But the ultimate victory came with Niagara Falls. The young boy who had read about the falls and imagined harnessing their power was now the engineer who would actually do it. The Niagara Falls Commission, seeking the best system to convert the fall's tremendous energy into electrical power for transmission to Buffalo, 20 miles away, evaluated proposals from Edison, Westinghouse and others. DC couldn't reach Buffalo efficiently. It would lose too much power over that distance. Only alternating current, using Tesla's polyphase system, could transmit power over such distances economically. In 1893, Westinghouse won the contract to build the first major hydroelectric power plant, using Tesla's system to convert Niagara's force into electricity. When the Niagara Falls power plant opened in 1895, sending power to Buffalo through Tesla's polyphase transmission system, the war of the currents was effectively over. Tesla's alternating current had won not through propaganda or fear, but through superior engineering and economic efficiency. Edison's DC system, for all the capital invested in it, was obsolete. But victory came with a bitter price. Westinghouse, financially overextended from fighting Edison and building the massive infrastructure required for AC, faced bankruptcy. In 1897, he asked Tesla to meet him in Pittsburgh. The royalty agreement they'd signed 9 years earlier, $2.50 per horsepower of electricity generated, would, if enforced, make Tesla one of the wealthiest men in America, but would bankrupt Westinghouse. Tesla, standing in Westinghouse's office, was faced with a choice: enforce his contract and destroy the company that had backed him, or tear up the agreement and sacrifice his fortune. According to the legend, Tesla walked to the safe where Westinghouse kept the contract, took it out, and tore it to pieces. "Mr. Westinghouse," he reportedly said, "you have been my friend. You believed in me when others had no faith. You were brave enough to go ahead when others lacked wiederholen courage. You supported me when even your own engineers opposed you. Here is your contract, and here is my contract. I will tear both of them to pieces, and you will no longer have any troubles from my royalties." The exact truth of this scene is disputed. Some historians suggest the negotiation was more complex, involving some compensation, but the result was clear. Tesla gave up royalties that would have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money. He chose loyalty and the advancement of his technology over personal wealth. It was perhaps the most consequential financial decision of his life, and one he would come to regret during decades of poverty that followed. Yet even as he sacrificed his fortune, Tesla was already pursuing visions far beyond AC power systems. His laboratory on South Fifth Avenue in Manhattan had become a playground of electrical experimentation that pushed into territories no one else was exploring. He was investigating high-frequency currents, wireless transmission of energy, what he called radiant energy, and phenomena that seemed to border on the impossible. By 1895, Tesla's laboratory was producing electrical effects that seemed more like magic than science. He could pass 1,000,000 volts through his body without harm. He could light lamps across a room with no visible connections. He created artificial lightning that danced between massive coils, producing thunder that could be heard blocks away. Passers-by on the street would stop and stare at the upper windows of his laboratory, where strange glows and flashes pulsed late into the night. It was around this time that Tesla became aware of Wilhelm Röntgen's discovery of X-rays. Almost immediately, Tesla began investigating these mysterious rays using his own high-frequency equipment. He produced some of the clearest X-ray images of the era, including a remarkable image of a foot in a shoe, the bones visible through the leather. He sent Röntgen a selection of his X-ray photographs, which Röntgen praised as superior to his own. Tesla was on the verge of systematizing his X-ray work when disaster struck. On March 13, 1895, a fire of unknown origin, possibly a carelessly discarded cigarette by a workman, possibly an electrical malfunction, swept through his laboratory. Everything was destroyed. Years of research notes, prototypes of new inventions, irreplaceable equipment he'd built himself. The loss was devastating, both emotionally and practically. For most inventors, this would have been the end. But Tesla's unique method of working, building and testing everything first in his mind, meant that while physical objects were lost, the knowledge itself remained intact. "It is not the material things that I mourn," he told reporters after the fire, "but the loss of the time I must now spend rebuilding what I had already perfected." With financial backing from his friend Edward Dean Adams, Tesla rebuilt his laboratory, this time moving to a larger space at 46 East Houston Street. The new laboratory was even more impressive than the old one, featuring a massive Tesla coil that could generate artificial lightning bolts 30 feet long. The device created such powerful electromagnetic fields that it would erase the magnetic patterns on watches of visitors, stopping their timepieces dead. It was in this laboratory that Tesla began seriously investigating what would become his greatest obsession and ultimate frustration: the wireless transmission of power. Not just signals or messages, others were working on that, but actual electrical power, transmitted through the air or through the earth itself, available anywhere without wires. The vision was characteristically grand, a world where electricity flowed freely to anyone who needed it, where power wasn't metered and controlled by utility companies, but was available like air or sunlight. Power plants would broadcast energy the way radio stations would later broadcast signals, and anyone with the appropriate receiving equipment could tap into it. In 1898, he demonstrated what he called teleautomation, a radio-controlled boat that could be steered wirelessly. At a demonstration at Madison Square Garden, he invited audience members to shout commands, and the boat would respond, turning left or right, its lights flashing on command. The audience, convinced it was magic or ventriloquism, could barely believe what they were seeing. "You do not see there a wireless torpedo," Tesla explained to the stunned crowd. "You see there the first of a race of robots, mechanical men which will do the laborious work of the human race." It was remote control, demonstrated decades before it would become commonplace, and Tesla's patent for the system would become foundational to radio and remote control technology. But wireless power transmission, his true goal, remained frustratingly elusive in his New York laboratory. The dense urban environment, the limited space, the interference from other electrical equipment all made comprehensive testing impossible. Tesla needed isolation, space to build enormous equipment, and freedom to generate massive electrical discharges without disturbing neighbours or destroying property. In 1899, he found his ideal location: Colorado Springs, a mile-high city on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, with clean air, low humidity, and frequent electrical storms that he could study. The Colorado Springs Electric Company offered him free electricity if he would help them solve some technical problems. Most importantly, the open plains around the city would provide perfect conditions for his experiments in wireless power transmission. Tesla arrived in Colorado Springs in May 1899 like a mad wizard setting up his laboratory in the wilderness. He built a massive transmitting station on a windswept plain, a barn-like wooden structure crowned with an 80-foot mast supporting a large copper ball. Inside the building, he installed what remains one of the largest Tesla coils ever built, a monster that could generate millions of volts. His assistant, Coleman Dito, watched with increasing alarm as Tesla pushed his equipment to ever more extreme outputs. The artificial lightning created by the coil would stretch across the laboratory, striking the walls, the ceiling, anything metal. Tesla would sit calmly on a chair reading a book, the air around him crackling with electricity, while Dito cowered in a corner. During one experiment, Tesla's coil generated such powerful electromagnetic pulses that it destroyed the generator at the Colorado Springs power station, knocking out electricity to the entire city. The power company was not amused. Tesla, characteristically oblivious to the inconvenience he had caused, was thrilled. The fact that his transmitter had overloaded the city's power system proved how much energy he could generate. But the most remarkable observation from his Colorado Springs experiments was his claim that he had detected what he interpreted as signals from another planet, possibly Mars. During his high-frequency experiments, Tesla observed regular, repeating patterns in his equipment's readings that he couldn't attribute to natural phenomena or human-made signals. "The feeling is constantly growing on me that I had been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another," he wrote. The scientific community reacted with skepticism bordering on mockery. Tesla was almost certainly detecting natural radio emissions from Jupiter or other astronomical sources. But in an era before radio astronomy, these observations were dismissed as fantasy. By January 1900, Tesla had exhausted his funding and his welcome in Colorado Springs. He had gathered data, refined his theories, and most importantly, convinced himself that wireless power transmission was absolutely achievable. All he needed was a proper facility on the East Coast, near major population centres, with equipment scaled up even larger than what he'd built in Colorado. He returned to New York with notebooks full of calculations, sketches of a tower that would dwarf anything he'd built before, and an unshakable conviction that he was about to give humanity the greatest gift imaginable: unlimited wireless electrical power. All he needed was someone to fund it. The man he approached was J. Pierpont Morgan, perhaps the most powerful financier in America. In 1901, after months of negotiation, Morgan agreed to invest $150,000 in Tesla's wireless power project. It should have been the beginning of Tesla's greatest triumph. Instead, it would mark the beginning of his long descent into obscurity, poverty, and increasing eccentricity. The tower Tesla envisioned would be called Wardenclyffe, and its failure would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Tower of Dreams. The land Tesla acquired in 1901 sat on the north shore of Long Island, in a place called Shoreham, about 60 miles from Manhattan. 200 acres of relatively flat terrain with access to the sea, perfect for the enormous transmitting station he planned. He commissioned Stanford White, the famous architect, to design the building and tower. White, intrigued by the mad ambition of the project, threw himself into creating something both functional and beautiful. What arose from the Long Island soil between 1901 and 1902 was genuinely otherworldly. A mushroom-shaped tower, 187 feet tall, crowned with a 55-ton copper dome that could be electrified to tremendous voltages. Beneath the tower, Tesla had workers dig an iron pipe 120 feet into the earth, reaching down to groundwater. This would serve as part of his grounding system. Tesla believed the earth itself could be used as a conductor. That power could be transmitted through the planet's crust. The building itself was impressive. A 3-story brick structure with laboratory spaces, a power plant, workshops, and offices. Tesla moved some of his equipment from his New York laboratory to Wardenclyffe, including massive Tesla coils and generators. The local residents watched the construction with a mixture of curiosity and alarm. What exactly was this foreign wizard building in their neighbourhood? Tesla's vision for Wardenclyffe went far beyond what he'd revealed to Morgan. Yes, it would be a transmitting station for wireless communications. That's what he'd told Morgan to secure funding. But Tesla's true ambition was wireless power transmission on a global scale. He imagined a network of towers around the world, broadcasting power that could be picked up anywhere with simple receiving equipment. It is a simple feat of scientific electrical engineering, Tesla wrote in promotional materials, displaying the confidence that would ultimately prove his undoing. Only expensive, blind, faint-hearted, doubting world. The problem was that the project's cost spiraled far beyond the original estimates. Morgan's $150,000 was exhausted within a year, with the tower incomplete and untested. Tesla returned to Morgan repeatedly, asking for additional funding, explaining that the system needed to be scaled up even larger than originally planned. But Morgan was losing patience, and more importantly, losing interest. In December 1901, Guglielmo Marconi had successfully transmitted a radio signal across the Atlantic Ocean. A simple 3.S in Morse code, but enough to prove that wireless communication across vast distances was possible. Marconi was using technology that built on Tesla's patents, a fact that would later be acknowledged in court. But he'd achieved a working demonstration of transatlantic wireless communication. Morgan's question was simple and devastating. If Marconi could send messages across the ocean with much simpler equipment, why should he pour more money into Tesla's grandiose tower? Tesla tried to explain that he was doing something far more ambitious than simple communication, that he was working on power transmission, on a system that would make electricity available freely everywhere. But freely everywhere was precisely what concerned Morgan and other potential investors. How would anyone make money from power that was freely available? The entire electrical industry was built on selling power by the kilowatt hour, on meters and bills and monopolies. Tesla's vision of free, universal power was economically threatening to the very people who might fund it. "You cannot patent air," one investor told Tesla bluntly. And if power flows freely through the air, who will pay for it? Tesla, in his laboratory, working 16-hour days to solve technical problems and refine his designs, seemed genuinely puzzled by this objection. Surely the benefit to humanity mattered more than profit. Surely the liberation of people from expensive, inefficient power distribution was worth pursuing. Yet his engineering brilliance was matched only by his economic naivete. By 1903, it was clear that Wardenclyffe was in trouble. Construction had stopped with the tower incomplete. Equipment sat idle for lack of operating funds. Tesla's other patents and inventions were generating some income through licensing, but nowhere near enough to complete the project. He began selling off assets, taking out loans secured against future patent royalties, desperately trying to keep the dream alive. In July 1903, Wardenclyffe conducted what would be its only real test. Late one night, with Tesla at the controls, the tower was energized. Witnesses reported spectacular effects, the tower glowing with an eerie blue-purple light, streamers of electricity arcing from the dome into the sky, thunder-like sounds that could be heard for miles. Residents of Shoreham saw their homes lit by a strange, shimmering glow. The display was brief, just a few minutes, before Tesla had to shut everything down. Whether the test achieved wireless power transmission is unclear. Tesla claimed it worked, that he had transmitted energy that could be detected at a distance. But he conducted no systematic measurements, published no data, provided no independent verification. The demonstration proved he could create spectacular electrical displays, but whether it proved his underlying theory remained ambiguous. The test also attracted unwanted attention. Neighbours complained about the noise and the strange lights. Local authorities began questioning whether Tesla's experiments were safe. The spectacle that was meant to demonstrate the technology's potential instead made it seem dangerous and unsettling. By 1905, Morgan had completely withdrawn his support, and no other major investor would step forward. Tesla was forced to lay off his workers, shut down the laboratory, and abandon Wardenclyffe. The tower stood incomplete and inactive, a monument to ambition outstripping resources, to vision exceeding the practical means to achieve it. In 1915, desperate for money, Tesla proposed to the US government that Wardenclyffe could be used for wartime communications. The Navy expressed mild interest, but ultimately declined. In 1917, with America entering World War I and fears of German sabotage running high, the US government ordered the Wardenclyffe Tower demolished, fearing it might be used by enemy agents as a landmark for navigation or communication. The tower was dynamited, its copper dome sold for scrap to pay Tesla's debts. The building would stand abandoned for decades. The greatest project of Tesla's life, the physical manifestation of his most ambitious vision, was reduced to rubble and sold for a fraction of what it had cost to build. Tesla, now in his 60s, watched his dream quite literally blow up, but he never abandoned the core vision. For the rest of his life, he would insist that wireless power transmission was possible, that he had solved the technical problems, that only the lack of funding and understanding had prevented its realization. Was he right? Could Wardenclyffe have worked as he envisioned? Modern engineers and physicists are skeptical. The physics of wireless power transmission suggests that it's extremely inefficient except over short distances. The Earth's conductivity and the properties of the ionosphere create significant losses. Tesla's calculations, reviewed by modern experts, contain questionable assumptions and some outright errors. But Tesla's failure at Wardenclyffe wasn't purely technical. It was also a failure of timing, of economics. of his inability to communicate his vision in ways that resonated with potential funders. He was offering a technology that threatened the business model of every power company, that seemed to promise free energy in a world built on scarcity and metered consumption. As the tower fell and the dream died, Tesla retreated to his hotels in Manhattan, increasingly isolated, increasingly consumed by the eccentricities and compulsions that had always lurked beneath his genius. The years ahead would see occasional bursts of publicity, grandiose claims about new inventions, and a slow fade into poverty and obscurity. But they would also see Tesla become, paradoxically, more famous in death than in life. The story of Wardenclyffe, the mad inventor and his mysterious tower, the suppressed technology and the lost dreams, would capture imaginations for generations. Conspiracy theories would flourish. Had Tesla discovered something too dangerous or too revolutionary? Had he been deliberately suppressed by powerful interests? Was the technology stolen and hidden away? The truth was more mundane and more tragic. He'd run out of money, built something too ambitious for the technology and understanding of his time, and failed to convince anyone to fund its completion. It's a very human story, for all its science fiction trappings. The story of a genius who could see the future, but couldn't quite bring it into being. Who could build anything in his mind, but couldn't always translate those visions into physical, working reality. The tower was gone, but the legend was just beginning. The descent into eccentricity. The years following Wardenclyffe's collapse were marked by an increasing retreat into ritualistic behaviour and obsessive-compulsive patterns that had always lurked at the edges of Tesla's personality, but now moved to the centre. He was in his 50s, living in a succession of New York hotels, surviving on irregular patent royalties and occasional consulting fees, increasingly isolated from the scientific mainstream. His hotel rooms became laboratories of a sort, though not the kind with equipment and experiments. Instead, they were stages for increasingly elaborate personal rituals. Tesla developed a compulsion about the number 3. He had to walk around a block 3 times before entering a building. He used exactly 18 napkins to clean his dining implements at restaurants, stacking them carefully to his left in multiples of 3. His hotel rooms had to have numbers divisible by 3. He couldn't bear to shake hands with people, claiming that physical contact with other humans was unbearably unpleasant. He'd recoil if someone touched him, his face showing genuine distress. At restaurants, he'd insist that the waiter calculate the cubic volume of his soup bowl or coffee cup before he would eat, measuring with rulers he carried for this purpose. His aversion to pearls, which had been with him since childhood, intensified to the point where he couldn't bear to look at a woman wearing pearl jewellery. He would ask female dinner companions to remove their pearls, or would refuse to sit at the same table. Round objects in general disturbed him. He'd push away dishes of fruit, would only eat cubic or rectangular foods. These weren't charming quirks of genius. They were signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder that was intensifying as he aged, possibly worsened by isolation and disappointment. But Tesla couldn't or wouldn't seek help for these issues. In an era when psychology was primitive and mental illness carried tremendous stigma, he framed his compulsions as personal preferences or heightened sensitivities. Yet even in this period of isolation and eccentricity, Tesla continued to invent, to theorize, to occasionally emerge with claims of new discoveries. In 1914, he proposed to the US Navy a system for detecting submarines using electrical currents, essentially describing what would later be developed as sonar and radar. The Navy filed his proposal away without serious consideration. During World War I, Tesla approached various governments with proposals for directed energy weapons, electromagnetic devices for disabling enemy ships, and other advanced technologies. Most were dismissed as impractical or impossibly futuristic. Some may have contained genuine insights buried in grandiose claims. Others were likely products of his increasing disconnection from practical engineering. Money became an increasingly desperate problem. His patents on the AC system were expiring, ending the royalty payments that had provided his main income. His lifestyle? He insisted on living in expensive hotels like the Waldorf Astoria. Maintaining appearances, even in poverty, consumed what little money he had. Hotel managers tolerated his inability to pay because of his fame, and because he occasionally attracted wealthy visitors and publicity. In 1917, Tesla was awarded the Edison Medal by the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, the field's highest honor in the United States. The irony of receiving a medal named after his old rival was not lost on him. He initially refused to attend the ceremony, relenting only after vigorous persuasion by friends. When he finally appeared to accept the award, he gave a speech that was equal parts gracious and bitter, acknowledging the honour while making veiled references to the lack of support for his later work. His only regular income came from a peculiar arrangement with the Westinghouse Company. George Westinghouse, before his death in 1914, had arranged for a modest stipend to be paid to Tesla monthly, essentially a pension in recognition of the AC patents Tesla had torn up years earlier. This $125 per month kept Tesla from complete destitution, though it was barely enough to cover his hotel bills and food. Tesla's unpaid hotel bills accumulated to alarming levels. The Waldorf Astoria finally asked him to leave, though politely. He moved to the less expensive Hotel St. Regis, then to the Hotel Pennsylvania when he couldn't pay there either. At each hotel, he'd eventually owe thousands of dollars, his creditors either writing off the debts or accepting whatever settlement his patents or future income could provide. But Tesla found solace in an unexpected place: feeding pigeons. Each day he would walk to Bryant Park or other green spaces, bringing bags of seeds and grain he could barely afford. He'd spend hours there, feeding the birds, particularly the pigeons, cooing to them, studying their behaviour. To witnesses, it seemed like a gentle eccentricity, a harmless hobby for an aging inventor. To Tesla, it was something deeper. He formed particular attachments to specific birds, claiming he could recognize them individually. One white pigeon with grey wingtips became his special favourite. "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman," he would later tell a friend, "and she loved me. When that pigeon died, something went out of my life." The relationship with the pigeon sounds pathological in its intensity, and perhaps it was. The love of a lonely, isolated man for one of the few living things that would come near him, that didn't recoil from his oddness, that accepted his offerings without judgment. When that particular bird died around 1922, Tesla described seeing a brilliant light emanating from her eyes, claiming it was a sign that his life's work was finished. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Tesla became a fixture of New York streets, a tall, impossibly thin figure in an old-fashioned formal coat, walking with his characteristic 3 times around ritual, feeding pigeons, occasionally stopping to share with passers-by elaborate theories about cosmic rays, death rays, and other phenomena that had moved from engineering into something more speculative. On his birthdays, July the 10th each year, newspapers would send reporters to interview him, and Tesla would hold court, making spectacular claims about new inventions. On his 78th birthday in 1934, he announced he had developed a death beam that could destroy aircraft at 250 miles distance. On his 79th, he claimed to have created a new form of energy by splitting atoms. These announcements generated headlines, but no demonstrations, no working prototypes, no evidence beyond Tesla's word. Were these real inventions that Tesla had worked out in his mind, but lacked resources to build? Or were they the grandiose delusions of an aging man desperate to reclaim relevance, to convince himself and others that he was still the visionary genius of his youth? The truth likely lay somewhere between. Genuine insights mixed with exaggeration. Theoretical possibilities presented as imminent breakthroughs. His appearance became increasingly ghost-like. He weighed perhaps 140 pounds on his 6'2" frame, his clothes hanging loosely. His hair, once jet black, was now white. His eyes, once burning with intensity, now had a distant, abstracted quality. He'd give elaborate explanations of technologies that seemed to violate known physics, delivered with such confidence and specificity that listeners couldn't tell whether they were hearing genius or delusion. In 1933, the Westinghouse Company, struggling through the Depression, stopped Tesla's monthly stipend. Tesla was now truly destitute. His only income came from occasional magazine articles, usually birthday interviews, for which he'd receive small payments. Friends and admirers occasionally sent money, which Tesla would accept with great dignity, as though he were doing them a favour by allowing them to support him. The Hotel New Yorker became his final residence, arranged by Westinghouse and a group of Yugoslav-American businessmen who convinced the hotel to provide a room in exchange for the publicity Tesla's presence generated. Room 3327 on the 33rd floor, divisible by 3 naturally, became his home and his prison. He lived there from 1933 until his death, rarely leaving except to feed his pigeons. Visitors who came to see the famous inventor found a man who seemed to exist partially in another time, another reality. He'd speak of inventions from his youth with perfect clarity, recalling the exact dimensions and operating principles of devices built 50 years earlier. But he'd also make claims about current work that seemed impossible to verify. Receivers that could detect thought waves, methods to photograph thoughts directly onto film, systems to harness cosmic energy. His nephew, Sava Kosanovic, visiting from Yugoslavia, found his uncle living in conditions of poverty shocking for someone whose inventions had literally powered the modern world. The room was small, plainly furnished. Tesla owned almost nothing. A few changes of clothes, stacks of papers covered in calculations, and his ever-present breeding birds perched on the windowsill. Yet Tesla maintained his dignity and his vision until nearly the end. The scientific man does not aim at an immediate result, he told a reporter in 1938, age 82. He does not expect that his advanced ideas will be readily taken up. His work is like that of a planter, for the future. His duty is to lay foundation of those who are to come and point the way. It was a remarkably accurate self-assessment. Tesla's immediate results, his AC system, his motors, his transformers, had changed the world. But his more advanced ideas, wireless power, directed energy, thought recording, remained unrealized, pointing toward futures that might or might not arrive. The man who had demonstrated artificial lightning in his laboratory, who had lit the Chicago World's Fair, who had harnessed Niagara Falls, was spending his final years in a hotel room, feeding pigeons and making calculations that no one would check, announcements that no one would fund. It was a come-down of epic proportions, and yet Tesla seemed, in his way, at peace with it. He had seen the future, had built parts of it, had pointed the way to other parts not yet realised. Whether that future would fully materialise, whether his more extreme visions would prove achievable or impossible, he would not live to see. But he had planted the seeds, laid the foundations just as he'd said. What grew from them would be for others to discover. The final current. The winter of 1942-1943 was harsh in New York. Snow piled in the streets, and the city seemed colder, darker, more anxious. The war in Europe and the Pacific cast long shadows. In room 33.7 of the Hotel New Yorker, Nikola Tesla spent most of his time in bed, too weak now for his daily pilgrimages to feed the pigeons. He was 86 years old, frail beyond description. The hotel staff brought him meals, which he often left untouched. His only consistent visitor was Sava Kosanovich, his nephew, who tried to convince the old inventor to accept more help, to perhaps move to more comfortable accommodation, to see doctors more regularly. Tesla refused with characteristic stubbornness. "I need nothing but to be left alone with my thoughts," he would say. On January 5th, 1943, Tesla placed a Do Not Disturb sign on his door. 3 days later, on January 8th, a maid ignored the sign, entered the room, and found him dead in his bed. The official cause of death was coronary thrombosis, heart failure. He had been dead for approximately 2 days before anyone discovered him. The man whose alternating current system had lit up the world died alone in the dark, in a small hotel room, with no one present to mark the moment his extraordinary mind finally ceased its endless calculations and visions. The immediate aftermath of Tesla's death was as peculiar as his life. Before his nephew could claim the body or secure his belongings, representatives from the US government's Office of Alien Property Custodian arrived at the Hotel New Yorker. Tesla, despite living in America for nearly 60 years, had never become a US citizen. He remained a Yugoslav national. This made his property, especially his papers and notes, potentially subject to seizure. Government agents searched his room, confiscated trunks containing his papers and notes, and had everything transported to the Manhattan Storage and Warehouse Company. The official reason was to prevent any sensitive technical information from falling into enemy hands. This was wartime after all. And Tesla had made many claims about death rays and advanced weapons. John G. Trump, an electrical engineer at MIT, an uncle of future President Donald Trump, was brought in to evaluate Tesla's papers and determine if any contained information dangerous to national security. Trump's assessment, delivered after reviewing the confiscated materials, was dismissive. Tesla's recent work consisted primarily of speculative, philosophical, and promotional material containing no new sound, workable principles, or methods for realizing such results. It was a devastating summary. The government expert had effectively declared that Tesla's later work was worthless. The dreams of an aging man who'd lost touch with practical engineering. The papers were eventually returned to Tesla's estate, but the episode suggested that official America viewed Tesla's contributions as entirely historical, his more ambitious visions as fantasy. The funeral, held at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in Manhattan on January 12, 1943, presented a stark contrast. More than 2,000 people attended, including several Nobel Prize winners, representatives from numerous scientific societies, and dignitaries from the Yugoslav government in exile. Messages of condolence arrived from Eleanor Roosevelt, Vice President Henry Wallace, and scientific institutions around the world. The eulogy, delivered by renowned author Louis Adamix, tried to capture Tesla's paradoxical legacy. He was one of the great early pioneers in the application of electrical energy. His influence will be felt in many fields for generations to come. Yet, even this praise seemed to relegate Tesla to the past, to suggest his influence was historical rather than ongoing. Tesla was cremated, his ashes eventually placed in a golden sphere. Ironically, the round shape he'd found so disturbing in life at the Tesla Museum in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. His technical papers, after various twists through estate battles and government custody, eventually ended up mostly in that same museum, where they remain today. The New York Times obituary was generous but brief, describing him as one of the truly great inventors whose work on AC power marked an important epoch in the utilization of electrical energy. But it also noted his eccentricities and his later extraordinary claims, framing him as someone whose early genius had given way to increasing unreality. In the months and years immediately following his death, Tesla seemed poised to become a footnote in the history of electrical engineering, important for the AC system, but overshadowed by Edison, Marconi, and other inventors who had been better at publicity and business. His more ambitious visions seemed destined to be dismissed as the fantasies of an aging eccentric. But something unexpected happened. As the 20th century progressed, as technology advanced and achieved things that had seemed impossible in Tesla's lifetime, his reputation began to reverse trajectory. Scientists revisiting his work discovered insights that had been overlooked or dismissed. Engineers found that some of his seemingly wild theories contained kernels of genuine innovation. The Tesla coil, dismissed in his lifetime as a curiosity, became fundamental to radio and television technology. His patents on radio-controlled devices proved foundational to remote control and robotics. His work on high-frequency currents influenced the development of radio, radar, and eventually wireless communication technologies. Ideas he'd proposed that seemed like science fiction, wireless transmission of information, global communication networks, automated machines, were becoming reality, even if not exactly as he'd envisioned them. By the 1960s and 1970s, as counterculture movements embraced alternative science and questioned establishment narratives, Tesla experienced a full resurrection. Books appeared, portraying him as a suppressed genius, a visionary who'd been deliberately silenced by corporate interests threatened by his free energy devices. Some of these portrayals were exaggerated or outright false, but they captured a truth. Tesla had seen possibilities that his contemporaries had dismissed or ignored. The myths grew alongside the rehabilitation. Conspiracy theories flourished. Tesla had invented wireless power that could have freed humanity from energy scarcity, but corporations suppressed it. He'd developed weather control technology that the government seized. He'd discovered free energy from the vacuum of space. He'd been deliberately driven into poverty by interests that feared his gifts to humanity. Most of these claims were false or exaggerated. Tesla's wireless power system almost certainly couldn't work as he described. The physics don't support it. His death ray was likely a thought experiment rather than a working device. Many of his later claims were speculative or impossible given our understanding of physics, but the myths contained emotional truths, even when factually wrong. Tesla had indeed been let down by the system, had died in poverty while his inventions enriched others, had pursued visions too ambitious for his era's technology and too economically threatening for capitalist support. The inventor who had gifted humanity AC power had torn up a contract worth billions in today's money and died penniless. In 1960, the International System of Units honoured Tesla by naming the unit of magnetic flux density after him. The Tesla T is a fundamental unit in physics, used by scientists and engineers worldwide every day. The man who died unknown to most Americans had his name permanently embedded in the language of science. In 2003, a Silicon Valley entrepreneur named Elon Musk co-founded an electric car company and named it Tesla Motors, later just Tesla, explicitly invoking the inventor's legacy. Whether the company truly embodies Tesla's ideals is debatable. The inventor who dreamed of free, universal power might have been puzzled by luxury electric vehicles, but the choice of name reflected Tesla's status as a symbol of innovation and electrical genius. Today, Tesla's image appears on Serbian currency, on t-shirts sold to physics students, in science museums around the world. Wardenclyffe, the site of his greatest failure, is now a museum dedicated to his memory. His birthday is celebrated by enthusiasts who build their own Tesla coils and conduct electrical experiments in his honour. The ultimate irony is that Tesla achieved in death what eluded him in life. He became famous not just for his actual accomplishments, but for his vision, his ambition, his willingness to pursue dreams that seemed impossible. The man who died alone and forgotten became an icon of genius unrecognized in its time, of the visionary ahead of his era. But we should be careful not to romanticize too much. Tesla's later life was genuinely troubled. His mental health issues were real and debilitating. Many of his later claims were unfounded. His inability to work with others, to compromise, to translate visions into practical projects that could secure funding, these were genuine flaws that contributed to his failures. The real Tesla was neither the pure genius suppressed by evil corporations, nor the deluded crank making impossible claims. He was a profoundly gifted inventor whose real achievements, the AC motor, the Tesla coil, contributions to radio and electrical engineering, changed the world. He was also a man whose ambitions eventually exceeded his ability to manifest them, whose mental health issues intensified with age, whose later years were marked by isolation and increasing disconnection from reality. He saw the future with unusual clarity in some ways, while being blind to practical and economic realities in others. He could visualize machines that wouldn't be built for decades, but he couldn't manage a business or maintain relationships or adapt his visions to what was achievable with the resources available. As the last current flowed from his failing heart in that dark hotel room, Tesla left behind a legacy more complex and more human than the myths suggest. He proved that genius alone isn't enough, that vision without execution remains only vision, that the ability to see the future doesn't guarantee the ability to bring it into being, but he also proved that ideas outlive their inventors, that seeds planted in one era may bloom in another, that work done without expectation of immediate reward may bear fruit generations later. The alternating current that powers this very device you're watching on flows from Tesla's mind, proven and refined over a century of use. Other inventions wait still, sketched in notebooks, mentioned in birthday interviews, possibly achievable with technologies he never lived to see. The final current had stopped, but the waves it had set in motion continue to ripple outwards, shaping the world in ways both obvious and subtle, carrying forward the vision of a thin, strange man who once stood in a Budapest park at sunset and saw, complete and perfect, a motor that would change everything. The legacy in our hands. The world Tesla left behind in 1943 was already unrecognizable from the one he'd entered in 1856. The gaslit streets of his childhood had given way to electric illumination, powered by his alternating current system. Wireless communication, which he'd pioneered, and others had commercialised, was connecting continents. The modern age he'd helped birth was in full swing, even if it hadn't followed exactly the path he'd envisioned. But the real test of any visionary's legacy isn't just what they achieved in their lifetime. It's how their ideas continue to evolve, how their insights get picked up by later generations, how their failures point toward future successes. And, by this measure, Tesla's influence on our contemporary world is both deeper and stranger than most people realise. Start with the obvious. Every time you plug something into a wall socket, you're using Tesla's system. The 60 Hz alternating current in North America, the 50 Hz in most of the rest of the world. This is Tesla's polyphase power distribution, refined but fundamentally unchanged from what he demonstrated in the 1880s. The motors in your refrigerator, your washing machine, your air conditioner, these are descendants of the induction motor he visualised in that Budapest park. The power grid itself, that invisible infrastructure we take for granted until it fails, is essentially a global scale implementation of Tesla's system. Electricity generated at distant power plants, hydroelectric dams, coal plants, nuclear reactors, solar farms, wind turbines, is stepped up to hundreds of thousands of volts for efficient transmission over power lines, then stepped back down through transformers for household use. Every step of this process relies on principles Tesla established. When the Hoover Dam was completed in 1936, it used massive Tesla-designed turbines to generate power transmitted hundreds of miles to Los Angeles. When China built the Three Gorges Dam, the world's largest hydroelectric project, it used AC generators fundamentally identical to Tesla's original designs, just scaled to enormous proportions. The dream he'd had as a 9-year-old boy reading about Niagara Falls has been realised thousands of times over, on every continent, in projects that would have astounded him in their scope. But Tesla's influence extends far beyond power generation. The Tesla coil, that spectacular device he built to produce high voltage, high frequency currents, seemed like a laboratory curiosity in his lifetime. Yet it became fundamental to early radio transmission. Every radio and television set manufactured until solid-state electronics replaced vacuum tubes contained transformers and circuits directly descended from Tesla's work on high-frequency currents. Marconi's radio system, which won him the Nobel Prize and made him famous as radio's inventor, was built entirely on Tesla's patents. In 1943, the year of Tesla's death, the US Supreme Court ruled that Marconi's radio patents were indeed based on Tesla's prior work, effectively recognizing Tesla as radio's true inventor. The ruling came too late for Tesla to benefit from it, but it corrected the historical record. Modern wireless communication, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular networks, satellite communications, all trace their lineage back to Tesla's early experiments with wireless transmission. He wasn't wrong that information could be transmitted without wires. He just lacked the electronics and signal processing techniques that would make it practical and efficient. The smartphone in your pocket is, in a sense, a vindication of Tesla's belief that the future was wireless. Tesla's remote-controlled boat, demonstrated in 1898, was the ancestor of all remote control technology. Modern drones, both military and civilian, operate on principles Tesla established. Robotic surgery systems, Mars rovers controlled from Earth, autonomous vehicles, all build on the foundation of teleautomation that Tesla first demonstrated to that stunned crowd at Madison Square Garden. Even in areas where Tesla failed, his failures were instructive. His wireless power transmission experiments at Wardenclyffe didn't work as he'd hoped, but they weren't completely wrong. Modern wireless charging, the pads you can place your phone on to charge without plugging in, uses magnetic induction to transmit power over short distances. It's not the global wireless power grid Tesla envisioned, but it proves the underlying principle works at smaller scales. Researchers are still working on extending wireless power transmission. Witricity, a company spun out of MIT, is developing resonant induction systems that can transmit power several feet, enough to charge electric vehicles without plugging them in. Tesla's dream of parking your car and having it charge wirelessly isn't impossible. It just requires different technology than he imagined. The concept of harnessing natural electrical phenomena that fascinated Tesla has also seen modern revivals. While we can't practically capture lightning for power, too unpredictable, too brief, too dangerous, we are learning to work with the Earth's natural electrical systems. Geophysicists use measurements of the Earth's electrical conductivity to map underground structures. The magnetosphere, Earth's magnetic field, is now understood to be filled with electrical currents and particles that Tesla's instruments were probably detecting in Colorado Springs when he thought he was receiving signals from Mars. Tesla's claims about cosmic rays and drawing energy from the universe seemed like pure mysticism to his contemporaries. But modern physics has revealed that space is indeed permeated with energy. The quantum vacuum contains zero-point energy. Cosmic rays bombard Earth constantly. Neutrinos from the sun pass through everything. We can't tap these sources for practical power the way Tesla imagined, but he wasn't wrong that the universe is full of energy in forms we're still learning to detect and understand. His speculation about thought photography and thought transmission seems like fantasy, yet modern neuroscience is making unexpected progress in related areas. Brain-computer interfaces can now decode neural signals, allowing paralyzed people to control prosthetic limbs or cursors on screens through thought alone. EEG machines can detect patterns of brain activity associated with different thoughts or intentions. We're nowhere near photographing thoughts, but the idea that brain activity can be measured, decoded, and potentially transmitted isn't as crazy as it sounded in Tesla's era. The resonance principles Tesla explored, the idea that systems can be tuned to respond to specific frequencies while ignoring others, have applications far beyond what he imagined. MRI machines use magnetic resonance to create detailed images of the human body. Radio telescopes use resonance to detect faint signals from distant galaxies. Quantum computers, still in early stages of development, use resonance phenomena to manipulate quantum states. Tesla's emphasis on visualizing inventions completely before building them has become, in modified form, standard engineering practice. Computer-aided design, CAD, software, allows engineers to build and test virtual prototypes, catching design flaws before fabricating physical objects. Simulation software can model everything from airflow over a NASA airplane wing to electrical distribution in a power grid. Tesla's mental laboratory has been externalized into digital form, available to anyone with the right software. His struggles with funding and commercialization have also proven instructive, though not in the way he might have hoped. Tesla's inability to translate technical brilliance into business success, his tendency to overpromise and underdeliver to investors, his poor understanding of what motivates funding. These failures have become cautionary tales in entrepreneurship education. Business schools teach the Tesla problem, brilliant technology that fails in the marketplace because the inventor can't articulate its value proposition or develop practical business models. Conversely, companies like Tesla Motors, now Tesla Inc., have studied Tesla's mistakes and tried to learn from them. Whether successfully is debatable, but the company's emphasis on vertical integration, on controlling the entire technology stack, on making bold promises about future capabilities, these echo both Tesla's successes and his failures. The open source movement in technology also embodies something of Tesla's spirit. His decision to tear up his royalty contract with Westinghouse, his frequent sharing of ideas without patent protection, his belief that knowledge should serve humanity rather than enrich individuals. These attitudes resonate with modern developers who release software freely, with researchers who publish findings before filing patents, with inventors who share designs so others can build upon them. Tesla's environmental sensibility, his emphasis on renewable hydroelectric power, his dislike of coal burning, his vision of clean, abundant energy, has aged remarkably well. As climate change forces reconsideration of fossil fuel dependence, Tesla's century-old advocacy for renewable power seems prescient. The massive wind farms now spinning across plains and offshore waters use AC generators of the type Tesla designed. Solar farms feed electricity into grids, using his distribution system. The renewable energy transition is, in a sense, Tesla's vision finally being realized on the timeline he imagined. His less successful ideas have also found unexpected relevance. The concept of earthquake machines, devices that use resonance to amplify small vibrations into large ones, seemed like pseudoscience. But engineers have learned that resonance can indeed cause dramatic structural failures. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse in 1940, caused by wind-induced resonance, proved that Tesla's warnings about resonance effects weren't entirely unfounded. Modern architects and engineers now carefully analyze resonance frequencies to prevent such disasters. Tesla's death ray claims have odd echoes in modern directed energy weapons. The US military has developed the active denial system, which uses millimeter wave electromagnetic radiation to create an intense heating sensation on human skin, useful for crowd control. Laser weapons are being deployed on naval vessels to shoot down drones and missiles. These aren't Tesla's particle beam weapons, but they prove that directed electromagnetic energy can be weaponized, even if not exactly as he described. Perhaps most significantly, Tesla has become a cultural symbol, the archetype of the misunderstood genius, the visionary ahead of their time, the inventor who valued knowledge over profit. This symbolic Tesla, part fact and part myth, influences how we think about innovation itself. When we celebrate inventors who pursue knowledge for its own sake, we're channeling Tesla. When we worry about brilliant ideas being suppressed by corporate interests, we're recalling his struggles. When we imagine future technologies that will transform human existence, we're often thinking in Teslian terms, bold, revolutionary, transformative rather than incremental. The romanticization of Tesla has its downsides. It encourages conspiracy thinking about suppressed technologies. It can make poverty and failure seem noble rather than preventable. It sometimes privileges vision over execution, dreams over practical implementation. The worst aspects of Tesla mythology suggest that genius alone should be enough, that the world owes support to brilliant people, regardless of their ability to work with others or explain their ideas clearly. But at its best, the Tesla legacy reminds us that innovation requires both imagination and implementation, that some of the most important work is done by people pursuing visions others dismiss as impossible, that the future often arrives not on the timeline we expect, but through persistent exploration of ideas that seem impractical. Every technology has a history, and many of those histories lead back, in part, to Tesla. The LED lights in your room use AC power he developed. The wireless router connecting you to the internet uses principles he explored. The electric motors in modern electric vehicles, whether made by Tesla Inc. or its competitors, are refined versions of his induction motor. The MRI machine that might save your life uses resonance phenomena he investigated. You live in Tesla's world more than you live in Edison's. Edison's DC system died out, his specific inventions mostly obsolete. But Tesla's AC power, his motors, his transformers, his insights into electromagnetic phenomena, these remain fundamental to modern technology. The specifics have evolved, the implementations have been refined, but the basic principles remain those Tesla established. As we move toward a future of renewable energy, wireless everything, and global connectivity, we're moving toward a world that would look familiar, in broad strokes, to Tesla. Not exactly as he envisioned. His specific predictions were often wrong, but aligned with his general direction. More wireless, more electric, more connected, more dependent on harnessing electromagnetic phenomena. The thin, strange man who died alone died in a hotel room, feeding pigeons and making calculations no one would check, left behind tools we use every day and ideas we're still exploring. His successes power our world, literally. His failures point toward possibilities not yet realized, but perhaps not impossible. His life reminds us that the distance between visionary and madman is often just a matter of timing, resources, and luck. Every time a light switches on, every time a motor hums to life, every time electricity flows silently and invisibly to where it's needed, that's Tesla's legacy. Not perfect, not complete as he'd envisioned, but real, enduring, and still evolving. The current he's set flowing hasn't stopped. It's just transformed, adapted, found new paths, exactly as alternating current does, reversing direction but always moving forward, always carrying energy from source to destination, connecting and powering the world he dreamed into being. And so we reach the end of our bedtime biography, dear friends. The story of a man born in lightning, who spent his life trying to capture and tame the forces that had announced his arrival. A man who saw futures that hadn't arrived, who built some and failed to build others, who gave humanity tools it still uses and visions it's still chasing. If you enjoyed this journey through Tesla's extraordinary life, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It helps other curious minds discover these stories. And let us know in the comments, what aspect of Tesla's life or work fascinated you most? Are there other inventors or scientists whose stories you'd like us to explore? For now, as the evening draws to its close, rest easy, knowing that the electricity flowing through your walls, the wireless signals carrying information through the air, the motors spinning in appliances around you, all of these trace their lineage back to one man's vision of a world transformed by electromagnetic force. The boy who was born in a thunderstorm grew up to bottle lightning, to make it serve humanity, to point toward futures we're still discovering. And though he died alone and poor, his ideas live on, evolving, adapting, still shaping the world in ways both subtle and profound. Sleep well, dear friends, and perhaps dream, as Tesla did, of impossible things that might yet become possible, of free energy, of wireless everything, of a world powered by clean electricity and connected by invisible forces. Some dreams come true. Others light the way for those who follow. Until next time, good night.